Hello everyone, my name is Naheem Islam, and in this creative video project, I'll be exploring how Marvel Comics accounts for evil and suffering in the multiverse, and why these stories matter in today's world. At first glance, Marvel might look like simple entertainment, superheroes, villains, action scenes, and special effects, but when you look deeper, you realize something much more meaningful is happening. Marvel tells stories that deals with some of the oldest questions humanity has ever asked. Why does evil exist? Why do good people suffer? Is the universe guided by fate or shaped by free will? And is it possible to find hope and meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and unjust? Those are the same questions philosophers and religious traditions have struggled with for thousands of years. In religion, this is known as a problem of evil. How do we make sense of suffering in a world where good also exists? Marvel gives this age old question a modern twist by placing it in a multiverse where countless realities and outcomes exist. Some universes thrive, some fall apart. Some heroes rise, others fall. And sometimes the line between hero and villain becomes blurry. The Marvel multiverse becomes a kind of modern mythology. Characters like Spider Man, Doctor Strange, Wanda Maximoff, Loki, and even Thanos are not just fictional figures, they represent human struggles with grief, guilt, trauma, temptation, pride, sacrifice, and moral responsibility. Their battles aren't only physical, they're emotional, psychological, and ethical. So, in this presentation, I'm going to examine how Marvel uses the multiverse concept to explain and explore suffering. I'll look at key themes like free will versus destiny, the consequences of power, the role of personal trauma, and the idea that even in a broken universe, humans or heroes can choose to act with courage and compassion. Ultimately, the goal is to show that Marvel isn't just about superheroes saving the world. It's about understanding why the world needs saving in the first place, and what these stories can teach us about living with purpose, resilience, and hope in our own lives. When we think about mythology, we usually picture ancient stories like Greek epics, Norse legends, or sacred texts that explore the nature of the divine, human purpose, and moral conflict. But in our modern world, many people do not turn to traditional religious texts or ancient myths for meaning. Instead, they turn to popular culture, especially narrative universes like Marvel. Marvel functions as a modern myth system because it gives us heroes who face profound ethical challenges, cosmic battles between good and evil, and deep questions about destiny, suffering, responsibility, and sacrifice. Just like figures in ancient mythology, Marvel characters reflect human struggles and human values. For example, Thor literally comes from Norse mythology and carries themes of divine power, humility, and unworthiness. Characters like Iron Man and Captain America represent modern virtues and flaws: technology, ambition, patriotism, moral duty, courage, ego, and sacrifice. And characters like Wanda, Loki, and Doctor Strange embody themes of temptation, grief, pride, and the consequences of trying to control reality. Their stories echo ancient narratives about fallen angels, tragic heroes, and seekers of forbidden knowledge. What makes Marvel unique as a modern myth is the multiverse. Instead of one single narrative, we see countless alternate histories and realities. This opens space for exploring different paths humanity could take, what happens when a hero falls, when power corrupts, or when trauma overwhelms a person's moral compass. Mythology traditionally helped people understand why suffering exists and how to face it with dignity. Marvel does something similar, but uses heroes, science fiction, and alternate timelines instead of divine judgment or fate alone. In short, Marvel stories aren't just entertainment, they are moral and philosophical mirrors. They help us ask, who are we in moments of pain? What does heroism mean when the world feels chaotic? And how do we choose good when evil seems easier? That is why Marvel operates as a myth system for our time, shaping imagination, guiding values, and offering meaning in a universe that feels as uncertain as the multiverse itself. On this slide, I want to highlight one of the clearest examples of how Marvel explains evil and suffering in the multiverse: the story of Strange Supreme from What If. In this storyline, Doctor Strange loses Christine, the person he loves most. His grief consumes him, and he becomes convinced that if he just gains enough power, he can reverse fate and undo his suffering. He travels through time, absorbs mystical beings, and breaks natural laws, all in an attempt to escape pain. But no matter what he does, the universe collapses. His obsession destroys his world, and in the end, he is completely left alone. Marvel uses this plot to communicate a powerful truth. Sometimes suffering exists, but not because the universe is cruel, but because reality has limits that even the strongest beings cannot override. Just like in the book of Job, where a faithful and righteous person suffers without getting a clear answer, Strange learns that human understanding is limited. Trying to force control over fate can lead to greater destruction. Marvel portrays suffering here not as punishment, but as a tragic part of existence that cannot always be prevented or explained. So, how does this connect to our world today? Our society often tells us that if we work hard enough or control enough variables, we can avoid pain. But life doesn't always work that way. People still lose loved ones, face uncertainty, and experience grief. The story resonates because it reflects real emotional truth. Sometimes we suffer without clear explanation, and a response to that suffering shapes who we become. Strange's downfall reminds us that trying to overpower grief instead of processing it can destroy us, while humility, acceptance, and emotional vulnerability are what actually helps us grow. Marvel's multiverse stories matter today because they give us a framework to explore difficult emotions like loss, helplessness, and the desire to change the past. They acknowledge that suffering is real and sometimes unavoidable, but they also encourage resilience, reflection, and compassion in the face of uncertainty. One of the most powerful examples of suffering in the Marvel multiverse comes from Spider Man Into the Spider Verse. In this film, Miles Morales is thrust into the world where he doesn't feel ready for. He's grieving the death of his uncle, he's overwhelmed by expectations, and he repeatedly fails as Spider Man. His suffering isn't random, it's tied to the burden of responsibility and the journey toward becoming who he is meant to be. Every Spider Person in the film carries trauma. Peter B. Peter B. Parker loses Mary Jane and becomes emotionally broken. Gwen loses Peter in her universe. Even the original Spider-Man in Miles' world dies trying to do the right thing. The movie makes a key statement. Being a hero doesn't protect you from pain, it demands you learn from it. This parallels religious and philosophical values, where suffering becomes a path to growth rather than just punishment or faith. For example, in many faith traditions, suffering shapes character. It builds empathy, resilience, and wisdom. Similarly, Miles only truly becomes Spider-Man once he accepts that pain is truly part of his calling. His leap of faith scene symbolizes uncertainty and fear, and choosing courage anyway. So, how does Marvel explain suffering here? It suggests suffering is part of moral development. It is not meaningless. It shapes purpose. The multiverse doesn't erase pain, it shows that across realities, ordinary people choose to rise despite it. And why does this matter today? Because young audiences face real world struggles, identity pressure, loss, insecurity, mental health challenges. Into the Spider Verse tells them suffering doesn't qualify you, it can prepare you. You don't have to be perfect to make a difference. Like Miles, people today are navigating uncertainty, feeling like they don't fit, and questioning their capabilities. This story reminds us that heroism isn't about avoiding pain, it's about transforming it into strength and responsibility. In a world full of chaos and doubt, Marvel gives us modern myths of resilience, and Into the Spider-Verse teaches that suffering is not the end of the story, it can be the beginning of who we become. From researching and creating this project, I learned several specific lessons about how Marvel handles the problem of evil and why these stories matter today. First, I learned that Marvel doesn't treat suffering as random or meaningless. In the multiverse, characters like Doctor Strange, Miles Morales, Wanda, and Peter Parker suffer not just because evil exists, but because grief, loss, and failure shape who they became. Their pain isn't erased. They must face it, make choices through it, and grow beyond it. Marvel shows that suffering can be transformative, which connects to philosophical and religious ideas about struggle leading to maturity and humility. Second, I realized that Marvel emphasizes free will as a core reason evil exists. Most villains are not evil by destiny. They are shaped by trauma, pride, insecurity, or desire for control. Characters like Killmonger, Loki, and Kang illustrate that power without moral grounding leads to harm. This mirrors real-world debates about human responsibility versus fate, and it challenged me to think about how much control we truly have over the consequences of our choices. Third, I learned that the multiverse adds emotional depth to the problem of evil. Instead of asking, why did this happen? Marvel asks, what do we do now? Even in universes where things go wrong, heroes still rise. That emphasizes resilience, not perfect outcomes. Finally, this assignment helped me understand why these stories matter today. We live in a world dealing with trauma, uncertainty, polarization, and loss. Marvel's storytelling gives audiences a safe space to process grief, identity struggles, and moral decisions. It reminds us that suffering does not define us, what we choose to become afterward does. And it teaches that hope is not naive, it is an active choice, especially when the world feels overwhelming. Overall, this project taught me that Marvel is not just entertainment, it is modern mythology that helps us confront pain, understand human flaws, and still believe in the possibility of courage. Thank you for thank you for listening to this presentation. I want to thank Dr. Shock as well for allowing me to pick this amazing topic, and thank you.